So you had this picture in your head. It wasn't fully formed, maybe, but more of a feeling than an actual blueprint. A sense of how this was supposed to actually go, how it was supposed to pan out, how close you would be, how often you would laugh, how you'd handle hard things together. That's how it all started. But then life shows up. And the marriage that you have is not entirely the one that you imagined when you started this journey. Maybe it's better in some ways. Maybe it's harder in ways that you didn't quite imagine it would be. Maybe there are whole categories of what you hoped for that just haven't materialized. And you've carried the gap between what you expected and what's actually going on longer than you've admitted to yourself. Most couples do. And most couples actually never talk about it directly, which means that both parties, both spouses, are quietly grieving a marriage that they never actually had. I'm Coach Shaun, and this is week 8 of The Marriage We're Building Now. I'm narrating from my book, The 52 Weeks Devotions for Married Couples. And this week, we're going to name something that most people keep to themselves. In 1 Corinthians 13:12, it says this: Now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. There's something really profound in that. We see partially. In other words, we only catch a glimpse. We know in part, including the people closest to us and including ourselves. You came into your marriage with a partial picture of who your spouse would be, of who you would become together, of what this life would feel like from the inside. And partial pictures are not wrong, they're just incomplete. The work of a long marriage is learning to hold what you see now in reality, the real, the full, the complicated person in front of you, with the same love you gave the incomplete version that you imagined. Grief is part of a long marriage. Now, we might not like to hear that, but I don't mean grief for things that went wrong. I mean grief for things that simply didn't happen. The closeness you expected, the partnership you imagined, the version of your spouse you thought you'd see emerge, the version of yourself. Many couples live with this picture that they wish they had, but don't have. Most people don't name this as grief. They just carry a very under the surface feeling of disappointment that shows up as sarcasm, criticism, a detachment, or a vague, persistent feeling that something's missing in my life without being able to say that exactly. But naming it matters. Not so you can blame your spouse for failing to be the person you imagined, not so you can blame yourself for not being enough, but so you can put the loss in its proper place and stop letting it quietly run the marriage from below the surface. If you're allowing a illusion to control how you relate to each other, there's going to be this constant void within your lives, within your life. Unexamined disappointment has a way of doing that. It sits below the surface and it shapes how you interpret everything that your spouse does. You're always holding them to this cardboard cutout of a illusion, of a dream, of an imagined spouse or situation. And so you interpret everything that they do through this illusion, through this imagined picture. And because it gets interpreted through it, it colors everything, even the good and great moments. It deserves to be named, and then it deserves to be sorted. Here's a distinction worth sitting with for this week. Grieving an expectation is different from grieving a need. Some of what you expected was just fantasy, a romantic projection that was never really tied to who your spouse actually was or who you actually were. I often have said, you married a bank manager. Don't try and make them to be, uh, a corporate executive. You can't make a person to be something you're not or be disappointed because they're not that. That's where we have to stay within the reality. Letting go of that romantic projection isn't loss, it's growing up. But some of what you hoped for was a real need for connection, for partnership, obviously, for being seen and recognized and acknowledged, being respected, for being part of a team as a couple, for someone to really get to know you and be your best friend. If that need hasn't been met, well, that deserves a real conversation as well. But not an accusation, not a list of criticisms and failures, not the weight of every disappointment stacked up and thrown onto the table all at once. A vulnerable, clear, honest conversation about what you needed and haven't received. There's a difference between saying, you've never been what I needed, and saying, I have a need I haven't been honest about, and I want to tell you what it is. One is an indictment, the other is an invitation. The marriage relationship that you desire and want is actually on the other side of that invitation. So here's a thought that I want to leave you with today. The marriage, or this week, the marriage you have is not a consolation prize. It's not just, put up with this. It's real. It has real people in a real relationship that's been built over however many years. It has things in it worth honoring, history worth respecting, moments that the imagined version never could have had. It may still have the capacity to become more of what you had hoped for and dreamed about, if you're willing to say what you actually need. It comes down to communication. It comes down to having that conversation, and not just, like I said, a dumping one time on the table of everything that I'm unhappy with, but a constant discipline, habit, if you may, of having this discussion, a constant building of the discussion, of the conversation, of the communication. Let go of the fantasy, of the illusion, and hold on to the real need. And as I say, carefully, honestly, bring it to your spouse. Over time, talk about the different things. Never as a complaint, never as a criticism. That's going to alienate your relationship. But bring it as a gift for them to understand. Because telling your spouse what you genuinely need is one of the most intimate things that you can do. They want to know what pleases you. It says, when you bring it to them, this gift, it says, I still believe this marriage is for me. I still believe you want to know. Here's a practice for this week, an assignment. It's a writing exercise, and I want you to do it separately before you actually have a conversation. Start with this sentence and then finish it. One thing I hoped our marriage would look like by now is. Write it down and then sit together and read what you each wrote. Don't respond and especially don't react. Don't respond straight away. Don't react. Reaction is always straight away. Just let it sit. And then finish this sentence together. One thing our marriage has become that I genuinely didn't expect and am grateful for is. Writing before speaking changes what gets said. Trust the process. You don't have to pretend the gap isn't there. You don't have to grieve for it forever either. I want to say put it aside. It's just like get over the grief now. It's done. You're in and invested here. Now begin to build what you have where you are today. You have to be honest enough to call it out and brave enough to bring your real self to the table. Hey, I'm Coach Shaun. The book is in the description, and I will see you next Friday for week 9.